Welcome to our webinar on systems thinking and transdisciplinarity. It is great to see so many people online, and we also have a couple of people in the room who are part of our research team on systems thinking and transdisciplinarity. My name is Nici Zimmermann. I'm Professor of System Dynamics at UCL, and you will hear not from me today, but we have a very diverse group of presenters. So after a short introduction, we will hear from Athina. She's going to talk about very much her personal experience on transdisciplinary research. And afterwards, we will hear from Koko. Koko taking us through a couple of projects where she combined systems thinking on environmental research. Then we have Nick Woodruff from a government department. He's going to talk how also in a government department, they are trying to embed systems thinking in their day-to-day practice. And then Feni Nita is going to follow because she is researching how this is then happening, kind of how do people adopt systems thinking practices and competencies. And in the end, I will have a very short presentation also going into the nitty-gritty, like in a workshop, how do people adopt interdisciplinarity. So you see, this is a real mix of transdisciplinary research, of systems research, and also about the interconnections between them. And then we would like to finish with a discussion in the end. And we would really like you to all participate. There is a Q&A where you can raise your questions and comments. We have a short question session after each presentation and then a wider discussion in the end. Just one note, so this webinar will be recorded so that you are just all aware. And what is the background to this webinar? So the research area of environmental design and engineering is celebrating its 60th year anniversary at UCL. And this is part of the events of this anniversary celebration. And for more than 10 years now, we also had a dedicated institute for environmental design and engineering research. Before, this research was kind of integrated into other areas and institutes. And this institute now has 130 kind of staff, like research and academic staff and doctoral researchers together. And out of those 130, 73 are doctoral researchers. And we have 8 research themes under environmental design and engineering. And here you see the research themes. It's quite diverse, from light to acoustics to kind of moisture, sustainability topics, and technical aspects of smart buildings, life cycle perspectives, energy use. And the newest addition to the themes is systems thinking and transdisciplinarity. And this is what today's webinar is focusing on. And as part of the activities, just to give you a little bit of background, we also created diagrams that represent our research focus. We call them causal loop diagrams. And here you see a causal loop diagram of the area of systems thinking and transdisciplinarity in our institute. It might look very complex. We will focus on a couple of these areas today. So for example, at the bottom left in green, we will learn about transdisciplinarity and also how to involve and implement diverse knowledge in our research and also in our collaboration with practice. At the top, we will look at understanding how workshops work, how communication really happens at the nitty-gritty detail. Then we will look at fit for purpose and useful approaches and tools, support effective communication of complexity, and also we will look at how to embed systems thinking into decision-making and into policy-making. So those are some of the areas that we are going to cover today. But after this introduction, we are having our first presentation. This is from Athina, and she's going to talk about experience in transdisciplinary research, and we're just having a short swap so that you can also see her slides.
Hello everyone, my name is Athina Petsou and I'm going to talk today about my experience in transdisciplinary research. My background is an engineer, and I'm doing my PhD here in Bezier with the topic of how to rethink energy retrofit, having user perspective in the center with goals of health and thermal comfort. And my special interest is in social housing and heritage buildings. So when talking about transdisciplinary research, the stage zero, it's like understanding the complexity, understanding that there is a topic that's already has been studied a lot and there is a lot of research on it. And there are a lot of different stakeholders involved, from practitioners, occupants, local authorities, policymakers. That was stage zero. And how to engage with different scholars and practitioners together to develop a novel concept and a novel methodological approach, and how to implement thermal comfort and social housing retrofit. So the first stage, framing the problem. So what are the design choices based on what kind of assumptions? Occupancy, room use, what are the social dynamics and people's preferences, and what are the reasons behind this behavior? What's the actual lack of data about different use of spaces, different priorities between designer and user, limited engagement of the user. So not only for design, but also on the handoff phase, and a documented energy performance gap. Stage two in my research was like first of me for my own perspective, a shift of theories. What are the main theories that have been used, and how to change it and implement social practice theory that led like for me develop new skills and engage with different stakeholders with mostly interviews and surveys. And what I did most of my research during COVID time, so I had to implement also this level of complexity about social distancing. And at the end, I want to talk about stage three, exploring impact. What could be the potential impact of my work? It's a stage that I'm exploring now, from a workshop from practitioners. What are the priorities that the communities propose themselves, how to implement, for example, zoning practices in actual design. And I want to address like cross-disciplinary teaching as well as exploring impact, because it became a permanent lecture in ISH, Sustainable Heritage, and National Technical University of Athens. And at the end, how we started new collaborations, for example, with Koko and with other researchers, and implement this methodology of engaging all these different perspectives. But mostly what I want to talk about is this personal shift and how I had to face like major challenges, but I think towards the end of my PhD realized I developed major skills as well. And one of the challenges was the translation problem. These different audiences, not only academics, practitioners, policymakers, but also different disciplines inside academia. And I think that was, for me, actually the hardest challenge, because it was harder to cross. And with my engineering background, I felt I lacked a lot of different theoretical skills or methodological skills, organizational skills, that they're needing in-depth understanding different subjects, and learning new theories, new methodologies in a limited time, and the confidence that you need in when you engage with different communities and request their time and also their knowledge. And I think like too, they're a bit like a reflection in the academic life or in the PhD life. It's a late translational of this research in academic publications and fears and concerns of professional belonging. But what I wanted more to focus on is like the skills that developed, that is curiosity, open-mindedness, in understanding different perspectives and trying to find ways to make diverse connections and collaborations that have made me highly adaptable and active listener, and use this reflexivity that also like I try to put here in the methods itself And I just want to close thinking that for me, transdisciplinary research isn't only a method that I apply, such as other methods I have used to, but also it's a mindset shift for me. And I think it's a shift that values the complexity instead of fighting it, and try to make more simple systems and embrace the collaboration and different form of knowledge. And for me as a researcher, what I gained mostly was my adaptability, and I do believe that it can lead to meaningful change and transformation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Athina.
Our first question is, did you find that it was easier for some disciplines to relate to each other while others were more distant?
Yes, I think I didn't make this point, but that was like one huge undertake that not only transdisciplinary, but interdisciplinary research. There are some easier to collaborate with each other, when I think also the methods in self and methods that relate to different disciplines are harder to understand, or the study case methodology can give other results that maybe a designer needs other kind of results to work, and how you can translate those. I think it's a whole thing on its own. Yes, I definitely believe that there are disciplines that they're more easier go together more easily, and things that they need like that's like a big part of the work is to make a language and definitions that all understand the same. I think definition making is one of the biggest part that I take away as in my experience.
We've just had 2 more questions in. So from Martin Richardson, what disciplines were involved in your work?
So it's like the thermal comfort literature, the retrofit design, and also the social practice theory, so like social science, and yeah, at the end, yeah, human geography, if I could put it. Yeah.
And we have one more question which says, thanks for your presentation. How is text analysis different from literature review in your research?
So I said text analysis because it started as a literature review, but as I continue, I started like just a simple literature review, but as I continue on building my study cases, I needed to come back and do specific text analysis in extracting like what are the gaps, what are the limits. So I needed to come back and do text analysis like as a method. I don't know if it made sense, but I think my project also became transdisciplinary. It didn't start like transdisciplinary. So something that starts as a literature review, you may need to go back and find the right method to properly see it and get the answers you need in order to make your system and design the workshop, design the.
Well, we've just had 3 more questions in now, if we've got time for those, hopefully.
Might not have, or like you're just very, very brief. Maybe we can take them all together with a brief reply.
Yeah, so 2 of them have been upvoted, so I think there's 2 that really want to be answered. This is a shorter one. How can we give policy insights from the systems thinking mapping based on experience? Can you give examples? And then the other one that's been upvoted is checking to see how you've been able to navigate situations when discipline leaders tend to resist cross and transdisciplinary conversations for exploring collaborations.
So I want to start replying the second one, because I'm part like of a paper as well that we wrote with early career researchers about collaborative research.
Well, and thank you very much, Athina. It's great to see kind of how your understanding and as a researcher and also your project, how you co-evolved together. It's great to see. Next, we have Koko. Koko is also talking about her experience across a couple of projects.
So hello, everyone. My name is Koko Zhou. I am a research fellow in system dynamics at IED. Today, I'm going to talk through a few system dynamics projects and interventions that our team worked on in the last couple of years, I will say, and hopefully, come back and reflect a bit of what do we mean by system dynamics interventions and how do we think about our ongoing work. For folks who are new to the specific world of system dynamics, just having like a historical overview of the field is system dynamics is a field that starts roughly from 1950s by J. Forrester at MIT. The idea is to understand how do we think about endogenous behaviors within the system. So that includes feedback loops, includes complex behaviors, particularly within the system rather than external shocks. So there's a lot of famous models being done in the early stage of system dynamics, such as World 3, which really focused on environmental pollution, resources, and population. And as the field is growing in the last couple of decades, how we think about system dynamics interventions kind of extended from the initial idea of formal simulation, but also include very specific structuring methods, including participatory engagement and also facilitation to work with policymakers, communities for formulating, framing the problems, and also co-design solutions. Important work, for example, is the 1990s by the Nici and the group model building workshops, and also in 2000 to 2010s an idea of a community-based system dynamics by Peter Hoffman. Today, I am going to talk through a few large system dynamics projects our team have worked on, including KUSH, which focuses on complex urban systems for sustainability and health, as well as Camellia, community water management for livable London. And I'm going to specifically talk about a shared case study between these two projects called Thamesmead. And Ventura, virtual decision rooms for water neutral urban planning, as well as a current active project PACE, policy and implementation for climate and health equity. There's lots of acronyms here, but the key message is those are the projects I'm going to focus on today. I also want to briefly mention about how system thinking is currently being used for IED 60 events, thinking about finding research gaps and pathways, yes, and a bit of like a ongoing working pace. So the first project is KUSH and Camellia, the shared case study between the two projects. KUSH is funded by Wellcome Trust, running between 2018 to 2025, roughly similar time frame for Camellia. Both of the projects are really large, and they have very different kind of like case studies. Thamesmead is just one of the shared case study agreed by both groups of stakeholders, thinking the use of space is particularly important. How we started about the quantitative model is we started with working with the causal loop diagrams, and we translate them into a quantitative simulation model on thinking about how do we bring more active use, more visits to the green spaces and blue spaces in Thamesmead, which is a specific region in London. What we did is we really worked on heavily with how to think about quantification, because a lot of the variables influencing the use of space, such as perceived safety and also accessibility, is also influenced how people perceive the accessibility. So we worked on the framework of quantification and thinking step by step, how do we take causal loop diagram variables, in particular soft and intangible variables, to quantitative model. And eventually, how do we use the model is we developed this interface where we show the stakeholders a model and ask them to play and test different scenarios and strategies. And on the right side, you see a range of strategies that are being used and tested. The project 2 was on Ventura. I'm speaking really fast because initially I thought the presentation was 8 to 10 minutes, but I think Nici said 5.
10.
Yes, but yeah,
10
I'm
is
hitting my 5, so I'm trying to speak fast, but happy to take any questions. So Ventura focused on water, and it's a project that we work very closely with Imperial as well as BGS, which is British Geological Survey. So the idea is to really combine system thinking with another hydrological GIS-driven model and to help the stakeholder thinking about water neutrality. What we developed is a qualitative model of water neutrality governance where we put in a digital platform and the stakeholders can go there and scrolling down up and down on the unfolding the qualitative map. The key learnings really from that qualitative map is really condensed here, which is trying to say that there's a lot of water neutrality design options, including blue and gray infrastructures, water efficient appliances, social awareness campaigns, rainwater harvesting, and greywater recycling. But those technical designing options also depending on how the governance approach is activated and embed those options into more resilient water system. So what we did is we also take a specific kind of the institutional variables from the causal loop diagram, which you see in the yellow here, the yellow boxes, including how do you manage across different catchment boundaries, how do you think about the time scales, etc. And we take that into the live strategic discussions within Manchester. And here you see how the stakeholders using dots and to kind of discuss who is accountable for which part of the institutional variables for the specific design options. So that's another use of system dynamics. Within the IED 16, many of you might know that we went through the online workshops, and hopefully some of you participated for some of the themes, is that we use system dynamics as a way to find research pathways, so that this is just an example of how we try to think about acoustic with linkages to public health using a small causal loop diagram, and the gray circles around the causal loop diagram really shows where are the future research pathways for acoustic theme. We did this for 8 themes together with Yu Hong Wang at that moment within our UCL team. One last slide about Project 4, which is currently our ongoing work with PACE, which is to think about how do we reduce emissions and improve health benefits across different sectors for the net zero. This is a project we collaborate widely within the institution, as well as the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. I'm running out of time, but also this is very active project, so feel free to reach out if there's anything you want to particularly know we're doing for the system dynamics here. So far I've covered different kind of system dynamics kind of tools that we are using for different projects, including simulation modeling, digital interactive interfaces, and causal loop diagram, and how do we take that to strategic conversations. And I will just conclude by saying that system dynamics interventions not just involves formal simulation models and structural methods for participation, but also for specifically thinking about the decision context, trade-offs, and stakeholders within that context, and develop the fit-for-purpose tools with the stakeholders. I'll conclude there, and I will leave with the slides of the UCL team. So a lot of the work here is not just by me, and those are just projects I been involved in, and definitely Rena and Nici are heavily involved in all of those projects. Some references. I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Koko. That was perfect on time. And I'm sure we have a couple of comments or questions.
Yes, we've got 2 questions just come in. The first one is, in integrating transdisciplinary research, what challenges did you face in terms of systems thinking integration?
I guess probably the question takes back to the point of the fit for purpose tool development. I think that's sort of like the operational idea we think about transdisciplinary research with the system dynamics work is how do we develop the tool that fitting the problems that stakeholders is interested in, and how easily they can implement the tool. So within the Ventura, we try to do it in a digital interface way where we kind of unfold a static causal loop diagram with some infographics. What we did is also kind of try to highlight what are some specific technical variables that the stakeholders need to focus their attention. That will show up in the other part of the digital system, which is the hydrological tool. I can share the link of that, but I think the challenge is really, although the message is quite generic, every context really varies. And I think the onboarding process of talking with people, understanding the problem structure is quite challenging.
Thank you. The next question is, what platforms do you use to create interactive CLDs for audience?
So for that one, actually the software engineers from BGS, the British Geological Survey, they did the interactive and the website for us. Currently within PACE, we are thinking about Kumu as a way to make the causal loop diagram a bit more interactive, where you can just zoom in and to have a more focused view of particular variables or sectors you're interested in. But yeah, if there's any suggestions for any other digital tools, happy to explore.
Thanks. The next question is, what's the application of system dynamics for PACE for climate and health co-benefits?
That's a big question. And so for us, we are particularly looking at the health co-benefits for the 4 sector: buildings, energy, food, and transportation. But we're particularly thinking about health benefits in a way that impacting the household adaptive capacity and how that increase or decrease people's adoption of low carbon behaviors. But within the room, we have Charles Simpson, who works on the other work package of PACE. And we have a lot of modelers working in the other work package, thinking about health benefits in specific housing or energy issues. Does that fully answer the question? But yeah, it's a bit of fuzzy. But I think the short answer is we all work a bit of different areas of the health benefits.
Thank you. The next question is, how do you see the capability of Gen AI models in developing system dynamics models, for example, comodel.io for constructing CLDs? Thank you in advance.
I think that's there's a lot of exciting, I think, methodology advancement within the field of system dynamics. I know Sarah Chan's team in the US, they have already developed this AI supported causal loop diagram development tool, where if you put in description of the problem, AI could help you to generate a visual of causal loop diagram actually quite nicely in comparing to ChatGPT. I think there's a lot of things we can still do around thinking about the role of AI in system dynamics, not just probably on the development of the model itself, but also potentially quantification and thinking about what are available data sets and how do we compile different sector models to a major one. As well, I do think about probably the AI in participatory settings of how we use AI to facilitate more of complex conversations, because one of the challenges for system dynamics is an onboarding process, people will easily feel like it's overwhelming. So actually, Athina and I are working on a small UCL project on thinking about AI and participation in general, but not specific for system dynamics in that case.
Thank you. The next question is, in facilitating stakeholder dialogue, what prompts have been the most effective, especially for communities unfamiliar with CLD?
I do think every step works, but this question is regarding prompts of stakeholder dialogues. I think the key thing we want to ask people is what is not working and what is a systemic challenge. Because the idea of causal loop diagram is not to map the system, but to map the problems. I think a lot of working well or effective prompts really revolve around the idea of what are some tensions and trade-offs within the system?
We also have our third presenter, Nick Woodruff here. So this is a presentation that comes kind of from the side of practice and policy, because we as researchers we try to kind of also collaborate, and we support systems thinking in decision making and policy making. But of course, we are not the only ones. I mean, Nick is going to talk about how he's going or how he's doing this within a government department. And you might have heard a different name when you signed up for the seminar. So Nick is coming in for another colleague who needed to be somewhere else at very short notice. So thank you, Nick, for being here. And over to you.
Thanks, and yeah, apologies from Adam for not being able to be here today. Okay, so yeah, what I'm going to talk to you about today is, I guess, about how I guess the journey of applying sort of systems thinking in government, and how across sort of different organizations in government, so we've got lots of different departments, both sort of central government and arm's length bodies, how sort of systems thinking is being embedded, what are the challenges, and how are we approaching those sort of challenges. I should say that, hi, I should introduce myself first as well. I'm Nick from the Net Zero Systems team. So I principally focus on embedding systems thinking in the way that we approach and deliver the government's net zero targets. So we look particularly at how we deliver things like carbon budgets, which are the interim targets to get to net zero. But we also sort of have this function where we look across government as well and look at some of these other tools and capabilities that we can build to support systems thinking in government. So I guess this is just starting with a bit of context, and I'm sure everyone's very aware of this, but the government has a lot of different arms to it and a lot of different areas covering many different sectors and areas of the economy. And sort of every government department, and this is particularly evident yesterday when we had a conference on sort of systems thinking with civil servants, they're all dealing with really sort of complex, wicked problems. So we on the net zero side are focusing on this target of sort of net zero emissions by 2050, and that involves looking across many different sectors of the economy and trying to sort of facilitate a systems transition from sort of maybe higher carbon practices to lower carbon practices, and that has many sort of trade-offs and different implications to it. So obviously opportunities as well, but there are many different government departments focusing on different challenges, and I think the important thing to say here is that a lot of these challenges are cross-departmental. So it's not just about working on the challenge and working in that sort of problem space. It's also about working with other departments and understanding what priorities are driving them, and how you work in government itself, which is its own complex system. So you're both trying to sort of influence the complex sort of system in the outside world, but you're also trying to navigate and get through the sort of complex system of government as well. So it's a two-pronged challenge for many of these different issues. So if I go on to the next slide, it's sort of how does government, I guess, approach, and how do different what access do civil servants have to the tools of systems thinking. So one of the sort of flagship publications which Adam, who heads up the team, was heavily involved in, was sort of 3 different tools and underlying sort of principles that civil servants and that we sort of share with civil servants in various departments, and encourage them to sort of use and interact with. And this is for many different sort of types and professions of the civil service. So we think this is sort of accessible and open to anyone. So I think previously systems thinking has been a bit of a niche for the operational researcher. But we really want sort of a wide range of professions, so social researchers, policymakers, economists should be using the tools and techniques of systems thinking. So there are three main publications that have been produced. The first is the systems thinking journey, which is essentially a sort of narrative and framework for the end-to-end sort of process of policy development, and that cyclical process of policy development, and giving civil servants a set of sort of very easy to take home sort of principles that they can embed in their work, and that's sort of a high level understanding of how you might embed systems thinking throughout a policy development cycle. Related to the civil servants, related to the systems thinking journey, there's the toolkit, which is on each stage of those of that sort of journey that we've outlined. That's sort of overlaying it with a set of systems thinking tools and approaches that you can apply. So that goes from one of the first steps in this is sort of confirming your goal and getting that shared understanding of the system with your collaborating community and who you want to sort of engage with. So you've got various tools around sort of rich picturing, using pig models, context diagrams, et cetera, and that comes right through to sort of implementing, monitoring and evaluating, as well as testing your sort of ideas. And that's where maybe sort of more of the modeling approaches, so you might incorporate some of the sort of system dynamics approaches, and developing sort of more of those theories of change come towards the end of that. So this I think it has 12 different tools that civil servants can use as part of this, and we sort of refer to that and have been refining that over time so that civil servants can have a very accessible guide to the different tools and techniques of systems thinking. The final one is the Systems Leadership Guide, which is aimed at senior civil servants. And this looks more at how to be a leader in a system. Many civil servants hold quite sort of powerful positions in different areas. So how can they demonstrate sort of systems leadership? And this focuses a bit more on systems archetypes. So what are those maybe typical behaviors that you may want to look out for in a system that may be constraining or driving change? So you want to be aware of what those particular behaviors are. So it focuses on not only the journey, which is the theme throughout all of these documents, but also on some of those behaviors that as a leader you can identify and recognize when maybe the system isn't behaving in a sort of way that supports a particular outcome or goal, and what are the tools and techniques that you can apply to sort of steer the system in a way and bring in other people that can support that change. So these are the three sort of, I guess, core documents that civil servants across all departments have access to and are published on gov.uk. So we can sort of provide a link to those, but this is sort of I wouldn't call it as grand as the Bible, but it is the Bible of systems thinking in government. We also have, and we had our second conference of the systems thinking interest group as well. So there's a growing community of systems thinkers in government who are using that guidance and applying it in practice. So this was the systems thinking interest group was set up in 2017, as it says, by Adam, who is as I say, head of the Net Zero Systems team, as well as colleagues in Department for Transport. And it sort of has three really core goals. One is around, I think, and this was the original goal, was to build that awareness, because back in 2017 there wasn't that great an awareness of systems thinking at all as in government. It was more of a niche back then. And so making it a sort of that fundamental approach that people expect to see in policy development and analysis. The second is building capability. So there is a lot of people sort of apply systems thinking as a part-time thing in their job. They try to bring in these techniques, but often don't have the bandwidth to really think about it in too much detail or to understand how a particular approach works. So it's building that sort of dedicated to support for systems thinking in government. And the final is a network, so bringing together like-minded people who are seeking to apply systems thinking, but are maybe struggling in a particular area, and want to know the sort of best practical applications. And that's where the sort of network and combined experience can be very helpful. And as I say, STIG has sort of grown over the last 8 years into a group that now has over 1,000 members and has sort of and we've had our second annual conference this year, which Nici very kindly came along and presented at as well. So that is a real sort of hive of understanding and sort of systems thinking activity, which is really exciting because it's growing in government, and something that previously was more of a niche has become something a bit more mainstream. So that's also very exciting. Alongside that, there's also a group of teams and people in different departments who are now responsible or look to sort of embed systems thinking within their departments. So they've set up the sort of diagram here is the different departments and who is responsible for sort of embedding systems thinking in those departments. They have set up sort of departmental interest groups and are responsible for running sort of communities of practice and that sort of thing to build awareness and capability of systems thinking within individual departments. So that's really the challenge that a lot of departments are facing, and STIG is something that coordinates all of these different departmental people to support them to embed systems thinking in these various areas. So each of these are sort of developing their own tools and their own approaches to embedding systems thinking in the department that they're in, because they each have their own context and therefore require a sort of bespoke approach. But they meet quarterly to come together and sort of discuss how do we approach this and what should we be doing. The final slide I just want to mention is that what my team specifically are doing, and so I work in the Net Zero Systems team, and what we've developed is a suite of sort of more interactive and I guess innovative tools for systems thinking. So we've got the toolkit that I've mentioned and all of the publications, but we've developed sort of a set of internal government software that allows you to explore problem spaces. So that's mainly focused around systems maps. So we've created a large interactive sort of net zero systems map that if you make a change in one part of the system, you can see how that is changed sort of cascades through other parts of the system. And we call this the net zero systems tool. We've also developed different ways, sort of a very interactive sort of Gantt chart that helps you understand how different maybe policy measures interact with each other. And with this capability that we've created, we're looking to, we've currently applied that on the net zero space. We're looking to expand that across government. And so you may have heard of the sort of behavioral insights team. We're currently looking into forming a sort of similar consultancy for systems thinking. And the initial name for this is the Systems Insight team. And that would focus on the three things on the right there, but based around sort of using those innovative tools that we've developed as a starting point. And that would work across all of those departments to provide that specific sort of systems thinking support and resource and build that capability further. So I'll stop there. It's sort of been quite a journey over the last sort of 7-8 years in terms of the embedding of systems thinking in government. And we're now getting to a point where we have sort of centralized resource and capability for this over time. So that's quite an exciting place to be in. And we can only sort of see it growing from here. And that's very exciting. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot, Nick. I'm sure that triggered a lot of interest and questions.
Yes, we have one question already from Frederick Zaba. He says, hi, I have an interest in systems thinking, public management, administration and public policy. Can someone outside the UK be part of the systems thinking interest group?
So the systems thinking interest group, unfortunately, is only available you can only be a member if you're part of the UK government or a member of a UK government department or arm's length body. There is the opportunity, if you have something like particularly interesting to bring or a piece of work that you want to highlight, you can come along to one of the conferences and sort of spotlight that. but at the moment it's not really opened out beyond that, mainly because within government there's people want to sort of share different case studies and examples of work they've been doing on systems approaches, but they can't share that outside of the department, or outside of government, I should say, externally. So it's sort of closed a little bit in that way, so that that allows the sort of freedom of discussion around it. But yeah.
Thank you. We have another question from Saren KC. Can you provide an example of your interactive tool, how one affects other systems and how they led or can lead to action from government?
So our tool, I wish I could demo it to you, but I can't because it's got some information on it that we can't show. But it is essentially it has 5 different systems of net zero. So it looks at how you approach buildings decarbonisation, how you approach transport decarbonisation, how you approach land use change, etc. And the tool is used, it's an accessible tool that anyone in the departments of energy security and net zero, transport and DEFRA can access. And essentially the tool is used by policy officials to explore how how a change in one area of the system, say if there's a policy to increase the number of heat pumps deployed, and it may be that it's tackling a specific barrier to heat pumps, how does that affect the energy system? So how does that affect demand for electricity? How does that affect energy prices? But also, what are the cascading impacts of that for, say, transport? Does that affect how EVs are deployed? Does that affect how much land we need? All of those sort of things. So you can basically look at this tool and say, okay, I work on this specific area, but how does that affect the wider net zero system? And so a lot of teams will use this when they're producing advice for ministers. They'll say, okay, I know I'm focused on this area, and they may be slightly blinkered and siloed in that way, but this opens up their perspective to that there's a wider sort of system, and that they can reference some of those changes that could be either risks or opportunities for their particular policy, because generally teams will sort of focus mainly on their area and not consider the wider piece. But this is a tool to help that sort of interrogation and understanding of a complex system. Yeah, I don't know if I missed any of that question there, but that's broadly how our sort of interactive tool works.
Thank you. The next question is from Miriam Naomi Spano. She says, fascinating work, Nick. So many questions, but I keep it at this. Do you remember any specific decisions / watershed moments that supported this journey to move forward, or was it more a continuous growth journey?
Yeah, I would say it's probably more of the latter. I would say there have been a couple of like really big moments. I wouldn't say they were like watershed moments, but perhaps ones that were pushed forward progress more than others. On the net zero side specifically, I would say it has been the result of sort of being championed by key like really influential people in government. So the former chief scientific advisor is now minister in Department for Science and Innovation and Technology, Patrick Vallance. He was a big champion of systems thinking when he came into post, and really pushed forward a lot of the work across government. Spoke with our team quite regularly about the development of our sort of interactive tool. And he also, he essentially sort of kick-started a lot of the work on taking a sort of systems approach to net zero. I don't know if you can remember the first slide that I presented, but essentially in the bottom right corner, there was a letter that was produced and drafted by Patrick Vallance. And he wrote that to the Prime Minister, basically saying that you need to take a systems approach to net zero. It's really important. And that really elevated the profile of systems thinking in government, because someone that important was writing to the Prime Minister about it. And so it's moments like that that have been very helpful, but I also think it's been like a ground up movement as well. A lot of teams and people have understood that this is really important for their work and wanted to find like-minded people. So it's sort of built from the top down and ground up as well.
Thank you. The next question is from Tim Hall. He says, great that HMG have taken a broad interest in systems thinking. Is there one department in particular that has embraced the potential and begun to use systems thinking as a normal way of working?
Yeah, interesting you asked that. I think there was actually a survey at this conference yesterday about how far do teams think that systems thinking is sort of BAU for their departments. And I don't think any department really said that it was. It's still quite a sort of it's not a niche anymore. It's very well understood, and lots of people will know if you reference systems thinking broadly what you're talking about. But it's not often. I definitely don't think people would see it as something that is maybe part of their roles. I wouldn't say every policy official or person sees that, and I wouldn't say there's a particular department that is ahead of the rest on this. I think there's certainly some that are ahead of others. I know DEFRA have a particularly large systems team. We in Net Zero have had a fair bit of progress in Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. I know there's some other departments, particularly like I think HMRC are developing a fair bit of systems thinking capability. But I would say that the barrier is often that is sort of translating that insight from systems thinking into something that suits the model of the way that government works. So that often means like providing it in really sort of short and sweet advice that you can present to ministers and that sort of stuff. So that's the battle that needs to be won, is sort of how can you translate systems thinking into the practice of sort of fast-paced sort of government and presenting advice in very sort of concise ways. That we need to be able to recognize complexity, but how can we then translate that into something that ministers and seniors can understand? So that's where the bridge needs to be. There's a bridge that needs to be crossed, but I think we're on our way, and a lot of the departments are building that capability, but definitely not BAU.
So, and thank you very much, Nick, for the great presentation and giving us also an insight on how systems thinking gets implemented in government.
Thank you.
The next topic relates actually very well, because Feni is trying to understand kind of, if you do something like implementing systems thinking in government, for example, how do people build their competencies and how can AI support? So over to you, Feni.
Thank you, Nikki. Hi, everyone. So my name is Feni. I'm currently a PhD student in this institute, and I'm going to share the work in progress that I'm working on. And it is about how to measure systems thinking's competencies and the role of AI. So it is going to be more about the methodology evolutions that I'm going to talk about. So what does it mean by systems thinking's competencies? We limiting our lens from the systems dynamics, and we are projecting the definitions reflected from the paper from Arnold and Wade in 2015, when we defined that its competencies is the capability of individual in identifying and understanding systems, and predicting their behavior and devising modifications to them in order to produce a desired outcome on the complex systems. So it is built up by 8 dimensions of skills and behavior, such as understanding system structures, understanding dynamic behavior, and understanding various systems in various scales. So then we take a look at the past literatures, and we found that majority focus on the academic context rather than the professional stakeholder settings. So then we conducted the scoping review on 100 academic publications from 2000 until 2023 on systems thinkings, and we found that 28% looking at how to measure the systems thinking's competencies, and majority of it adopted the quantitative method in identifying it, and majority of them really rely on the self-reporting mechanism in identifying the development of system thinking's competencies itself. Previous researchers focusing on the learner's reflections on what have been learned from a certain interventions, which is raise the questions about the learner biases. So that we're interested in exploring on how to make it more objective in measuring systems thinking's competencies, so we can understand on how to improving it so that more people would be able to adopt these tools. So then we conduct a case study on UK civil servants operating in the construction sector, and turns out that it is pretty labor intensive and time consuming, because we are trying to creating a framework that based on the triangulations approach, utilizing several theories and data collections method. So we collected data before the interventions, the learning interventions, which is we pick the group model building. Basically, people come together participatory, creating the causal loop diagram, and we observe the activities during the workshop. It was 5 hours workshop, and we test them after they participating in the workshop. So the framework basically look at 3 lenses. So we try to test the way they think when they're trying to solving a complex problem before and after, and then we ask the reflections, and then we take a look at the second and the third. We validate all the task result by identifying the critical learning incidents, we call it. So it is basically to see when people experiencing a surprise. So we identify it through the dialogue during the workshop, and also we take a look at facial expressions during the workshop as well. So we're interested in increasing the objectivity on the measurement instruments, and we want to understand how the group model building itself, developing the systems thinking competencies. And this is when the AI idea came about. So because we need to really reducing the time in order to be able to give a faster feedback to what works in developing systems thinking competencies, and whether that this framework really practically feasible and applicable to be adopted. So not only it is time consuming and also labor intensive, we found quite several inconsistencies in measuring the systems thinking competencies. The example is like, this is the assessments on one of our participants. So the instruments consist of 7 dimensions reflecting systems thinking competencies. And we experimented in 2 scenarios. So we gave them a scenario in solving a systems-wide problem. And the other one, we asked them a hypothetical problem scenario and asking them what they're going to do. And in the participant 3, the pre and post workshop systems thinking level didn't really change. But in the hypothetical scenario, it changed from the 14 into 15. So there are quite a different variations of systems thinking level if we adopted this framework. So and we asked them which specific stages really influence the way of thinking, the changes way of thinking. So in the systems-wide, they mentioned the stage 3 when the causal maps being produced is really significant. In the scenario base, they also consistently mention the stage 3. But if you take a look at another participants, this is the other way around. So when we ask them about systems-wide, there is an improvement after they following the group model building from 12 to 14. And with the hypothetical scenario, there's no change at all. And participants also reflected a different stage significance to their change of thinking, which is this is highlighted on various factors influencing this. We realize about the influence of their current role, background of educations as well. So how can AI be adopted? That we decided to create use cases. So we're gonna comparing human analysis with the domain knowledge, and the second one with no domain knowledge, and with the local AI
based tools. So we're going to conduct the assessment on these three and comparing the consistency of the result and also time spent for analysis. So the criteria, it needs to be run offline because it is very sensitive data that we are analyzing. And we choose Olama as the tools and the models for text analysis. We use Mistral. And for the image analysis, because it is quite very new in video and images, so we plan to compare 3 models. And the approach, we adopted the method from Prescott in comparing these outputs. So this is going to be the prompt design that we're going to do. So basically, we give the AI tools, the contextual background, inductive analysis, prompt, and we go with the deductive. We give the framework that we created and we ask them to categorize, and then we ask the tools to formulate the scoring, and we ask them to compare before the workshop and after the workshop. This is the example of the prompt, of the inductive and the modifications, and this is the example of the deductive when we ask AI tools to categorize a certain open codes to contextual or technical categorizations. So this is just a glimpse of the result, a very small questionnaires analysis, human with domain knowledge, with the non-domain knowledge, and AI generated. We can see that there are quite various similarities among these 3 approaches. And so basically, like the non-human knowledge generate less codes, but if we analyze it from the lens of consistency, it has like 100% consistency, but just less codes. But from the AI generated, there are quite similarities with the non-domain knowledge and with the domain knowledge human. So domain knowledge human with the non-domain knowledge created the same systems thinking competencies level, but a different aggregated score. So we see the discrepancy is actually comes through the rigidity of the scoring system. So basically, what's next in the project, we hope that we can give the practical applications of the STC measurement framework, more objective one, enhancing the group model building facilitations, and exploring how that the AI can be adopted in this topic. And we were quite aware of the vast opportunity on adopting AI, such as to bring more participants, to get more knowledge out of it, and to investigating a various ST method as a learning intervention. So that's basically.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have one question already, which says, I have a very basic question. I'm quite new to system dynamics modeling and have started with John Sturman's book. I would appreciate references to help me further develop my skills in quantifying models, writing equations, and related areas. Thank you.
I think is it from Nici? Yeah, thank you. That's so. I think this John Sturman book is the great start, and that's kind of, I think the person has the great source already. I would say please get in touch. We are happy to answer via an email as well. Oh yeah, Koko wants to
just to quickly add to that. So for the international system dynamics, the society, they have this mentor and mentee system, which I think is quite useful. I think it was organized by Rod McDonough, and modeling is part of the, I think, the mentor help that they do. So probably reaching out will be continuous.
So the last presentation is on combining systems thinking and transdisciplinarity, or in this case, interdisciplinarity. And this is work that I did together with our colleague Catherine Curran. And it takes systems thinking into the area of heritage and into a very interdisciplinary but also transdisciplinary project that brought people from museum practice as well as scientists together in the room and into the project. And you just heard from Feni that she was interested in really understanding also how competencies develop. And she also analyzed a workshop. And this is the same. So this is an analysis that goes into the nitty-gritty of communication at a workshop. And in the area of heritage, you have a lot of technological and scientific development. So for example, plastics were developed. Now also museum objects, they tend to be made from plastics. We know a lot about oil paintings, but we know a lot less about the durability about some of those plastics. And some materials they just deteriorate very quickly, but they are precious. And understanding why this is the case is quite a complex question that cannot be answered within one discipline. So therefore, we need this transdisciplinary collaboration, also not just between disciplines, but also going really into practice. And systems research allows for the integration of diverse types of knowledge and sources of knowledge. And we also know about its outcomes, so it improves communication, for example. But we really want to understand, but how does it do that? So we analyze the nitty-gritty micro processes. And what you see here is an analysis of a workshop. It's the communication at a workshop. You see in red, those are the contributions made by museum professionals. So as the more red it is, the more it's somebody who comes really from the museum practice side. The more blue it is, the more it comes from like a scientific side. And people make contributions, and facilitator in black. And you see first there is a graphs over time session on the left, which is where people contribute which variables should be in the model. And here the dynamics are very much influenced by where people were sitting around a table. And you already see there is a bit more red on the upper area on museum practice and a bit more blue on the science area. But there is also the area in between, which is both. So museum practice is, for example, about the handling of an object. Science is about hydrolysis and reactions with water. Both could be volatile organic compounds or changes in coloring, for example, which are relevant to both areas. And now we go through a workshop, seeing what topics did we talk about and how did this switching and transitions between those areas happen. And the conversation starts with the area of knowledge, and then it goes into scientific areas, assets and mass transfer. And then it comes back to museum practice, storage, hydrolysis, plasticizer loss, then handling, and it ends up also with the first topic of knowledge again. And what do we see from this? So on the one hand, when we see these constant transitions, and also when we analyze into a more museum or science topic, who is making those transitions and who is pulling into those areas? So the participants equally draw into all three areas towards a museum focus or science focus. But we see from the facilitator most frequently draws to an area that is relevant to both. And that's also quite an interesting observation and about the purpose of facilitation in such workshops and such gatherings. So what are the takeaways from this? In terms of interdisciplinarity, on the one hand, we see there's not just one interdisciplinarity. We see on the one hand, big topic swings, and we also see small transitions. And these help people related to their own experience, so that even if, let's say, there's a museum-focused topic, there are these small transitions that still help it be relevant, let's say, for the scientists in the room. And also, you saw that the swings were accelerating over time. They started slowly, and then the big topic swings, they accelerated. And also people refer to the diagram, a causal diagram in this case, more and more frequently. So that also showed that the diagram increasingly helped make those interdisciplinary connections. And since we started with experience from a researcher of this workshop, I would also like to end with the experience of the participants. And they said that it was really the first time that all those elements had been expressed on one page and that they were connecting museum policy also to the more scientific changes that happen in the object. So this is where I would like to end. I'm sure there are a couple of questions, so we would now like to move into questions and discussions, and I would open it to all and to everyone also asking questions about the previous presentations.
A question from Felicity Brown, which says, as an alumna outside this discipline, I would like to ask how, if at all, participants have been involved directly, door-to-door, face-to-face, to end users of their conclusions. For example, in the case of the first speaker, tenants and/or owner-occupiers of buildings affected.
So I'm not sure I understood completely the question. Do you mean to communicate the results? But I can explain. So yes, it's door to door. We did all the interviews and the surveys in person to collect the data. We also included interviews in a way that, so we aim to do surveys, but they were made interviews by the people themselves. So they changed the format during the interaction. And then we also reflected on that on our on my methodology in my PhD, why people prefer to do interviews, maybe they find it more accessible. Or so I think there is like also discussion there. We start as a scientist, say, I'm going to make a very big survey, and then you end up going and give 1 hour to each participant, and then you collect, I don't know, a lot of answers. So this is one takeaway. And the second is, so as part of the PhD, it wasn't implemented to go back and share the results, but because so many people really gave a lot of their time and they really did it also to help. It was very hard to recruit people during COVID and social housing residents. We had like, I collected 200 answers. So that's like quite a lot. So what I have been thinking is to find a way to make like, to go back and make like either a guide, practical guide for thermal comfort practices to showcase like the sustainability practices they already engage on, or to make like with them a design. But for this, like, requires external funding because it wasn't part of the initial PhD. So I think as the form transformed, it was based on design PhD, but yeah, so I think like I have it on my mind, and I think like it has to become like a part to give back also to the same communities, not to the communities in general, but they help you form the project. Yeah.
Maybe very briefly from others, also the question kind of how were participants directly involved? Just a question.
Yeah, maybe from my side, that I was initially involved in the projects that really focus on understanding a complex problem within this particular systems, and then from the other side of literatures that we realize it is the systems thinking tools is not only useful in solving a problem itself, but it has another benefits of enhancing participants' competencies. Then I directly communicated with the stakeholders and mentioning that we can also adding one dimensions of assessments out of this activities. Then from that point in time that we keep communicating with the participant, which is actually the civil servants who are hosting this projects.
I think that has been questioned.
Okay, good. Back to you, Velvet.
So the next question is, how might one go about collaborating with system dynamics practitioners, the UCL departments, for not-for-profit themes?
So kind of if you are not for profit, how you go about if you would like to collaborate with us, if that is the question. So I think kind of we are very open to anybody approaching us, because kind of we like kind of all of our research is oriented towards making an impact. So therefore, we very much like to work with practitioners and also set up the projects together with practitioners, like from different types of NGOs or policy, etc. So I would say just approach us. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. The next question is from Bowen Ma. They ask, I have a question that may go beyond this meeting. I've spent the last 3 months cycling through China, the UAE and Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, I encountered some shocks to my values and beliefs that were different from what I had in the past. The locals were so kind to me. I'm thinking about how I can connect my travel experiences in feedback loops to trace the behavioural reasons behind this entire area. I'm a bit confused and don't know where to start. They say my experience lies in thinking about business behaviour. My experience this time is more about understanding humanistic and personal behavioural psychology.
Maybe, should I start with this one? So I think that would be very valuable to share that experience. It's difficult to share it all at once and grasp it all at once. So what we often do is we try to understand what is maybe the core priority, and we try there so that we rather than looking at everything, really trying to understand what is the core behavior that we are interested in. And also in the System Dynamics Society, there's a behavior and psychology special interest group. It might also be worthwhile to connect to the members there. Or do any others have any more comments on this?
Sorry. I do have another comment. I think for another project, I work in the context of South Africa. And I think even though I don't do systems mapping, I think also in a way to use reflective practice and map your own preconceived ideas, and then through the data, I used interviews and focus group, but use the data as a way to unpack your own preconceptions and also document this change through the behaviors you encounter. I think this is also could be another way. I know it's not so modeling, but I think it worked. For example, it was useful for me to uncover these hidden biases.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just additional alternatives to practice. There are quite a lot of summer course that everyone can join and bring their own experience into the table and trying to generating it. One of it that I follow is from the System Dynamics Society as well, that we can bring any other experiences and trying to really creating the maps and guided by the facilitator. I think that's quite alternatives. And the other way is there are quite several free online course which emphasize on the conversations. One of it, the one that I followed, it is called Common Earth. So basically they're trying to reflecting every person's experiences into the concept of systems thinkings. But it's essentially focusing on climate change. But there are quite a lot of participants from around the world, and it is a really good way in practicing it as well.
Thank you. The next question is from Saren KC. If and when trade-offs arise between systems, do SDM provide guidance or insights on how they can be managed?
Koko, do you want to start with that, because it will very much relate to your modeling, right?
So I guess the question is, how do you use, or if we can use system dynamics modeling to think about trade-offs between systems? Yeah, I guess system dynamics modeling is sort of designed for that. If you have a model, meaning you can simulate it, then you can do a lot of sensitivity analysis and also scenario based analysis, and to understand how the strengths of the trade-offs, and how by changing the parameters within the system, how does that looks like. I do think for system dynamics formal modeling definitely is sort of designed for that. I think for qualitative, it's a bit of challenging if we think about system dynamics modeling as a broad definition rather than just formal models. But I think Donna Meadows' work on leverage points, and I think recently there are some methods advances of rethinking about leverage points for qualitative system dynamics maps can sort of supporting that direction. But I think trade-offs is very key for exploring.
And then if you have to implement that, that's the next step.
Yeah.
Bringing everyone into the same room is very helpful. Of course, you cannot always do that, right? But if you can, it really helps.
Thank you. The next question is, have any of you during participatory process or beforehand anticipate or facing power relations amongst participants/stakeholders involved that may alter the output/outcome of GMB or selection/relationship of elements?
Yes, we have. So for example, in some of our projects, when we engaged with stakeholders who we knew were not the most powerful people in the room, we might have engaged with them beforehand to kind of make them feel comfortable and also be able to then support them, for example, during a workshop to better place their ideas in the group and to better support them. We also had facilitators kind of impersonate stakeholder groups who could not join to at least have some of their voices heard. Of course, that it was kind of very much filtered. It wasn't as good as having them themselves in the room. But yes, we try to use some of those approaches to make participation more equal or as equal as possible.
And from a different project, not my PhD, but I think one way that I tried to manage such a situation was like to try to get funding to alleviate some kind of barriers that people maybe didn't, to have them there for the whole time that we required. And the second was like, when we started the workshop, it was a workshop. When we started the workshop, we very specifically state why we wanted all these different kind of experiences and what kind of knowledge you can get from, like, somehow make it clear so everybody gets in the same base. I think these two very simple things make why it's interesting for us, so it gets interesting for all, something like that.
Maybe just adding, like, facilitations is really the key in balancing out the power dynamics. And like in my particular pilot study as well, like it is clearly reflected that the most power really dominating the output of the system's maps as well, and it really depends on the objectives of the participations. I think facilitator really needs to mapping out the real interest of their participations as well, taking that into account before creating the strategy and facilitations.
So this one is from Luis Tavares. He says, thank you for your presentations. In practical terms, what methods or processes do you consider fundamental when managing a project based on systems thinking?
I can give a very short go because I was looking at the question, I was thinking about Simon's work we're doing for evaluation for PACE, which is I think evaluation is very key in that case, thinking about system thinking, because I think the key principle is feedbacks and iterative and joint decisions and ownerships. I think finding those kind of evaluation points and try to improve the project is quite key. So my short answer is evaluation, and Simon's here, I don't start to put you on spot, but that's my answer.
No, I think it's a good point, and just that kind of adaptive way of working, figuring out what works best for both parties is key, and the communication that is required to do that.
Yeah,
very important.
It sounds like that was a great last point. So I would like to thank everyone in the room and everyone online who contributed, who participated, who asked questions. And let us have this discussion and this event. I would also like to thank all of the presenters, and I would also like to thank Velvet for leading us through this so nicely. So thank you all very much.